My fellow grammarians, welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Jason Freeman. I'm a producer and editor here in the Author Events office. And as a former 6-year college English composition teacher, it's both thrilling and maybe a little daunting to be here to introduce tonight's guest. I mean, what if my word's not good and stuff? Mary Norris is the author of the best-selling Between You and Me, Confessions of a Comma Queen, a rambunctious and thoughtful memoir about grammar usage and practical life advice gleaned from her 3 decades in the New Yorker's venerable and notoriously fastidious copy department. It was praised by the Houston Chronicle as, quote, laugh out loud funny and wise and compelling from beginning to end. And Sarah Lyle, writing in the New York Times, says, Miss Norris, who has a dirty laugh that evokes late nights and scotch, is like the worldly aunt who pulls you aside at Thanksgiving and whispers that it is all right to occasionally flout the rules. Between You and Me was a finalist for the 2016 Thurber Prize for American Humor, and Miss Norris gave a popular TED Talk on that book's topic. Her latest book is called Greek to Me, Adventures of the Comma Queen. Another celebration and exploration of language and expression, this book celebrates all things Greek, words, gods, wine, and waiters, and offers a hot take on the distant but oddly familiar language that helped beget our own. On NPR, Heller McAlpin called the book, quote, an ode to the joy of exercising free rein in one's life, and referred to tonight's author as an uncommonly engaging, witty enthusiast with a nose for delicious details and funny asides that makes you willing to follow her anywhere. Tonight's author will be joined in conversation with Ben Yagoda, a professor of journalism at the University of Delaware, whose articles have been published in a bevy of periodicals, including the New York Times, Newsweek, and Rolling Stone. He is also the author of several books, including a biography of Will Rogers, a writing manual titled How to Not Write Bad, which I could have used earlier, and a collective biography of the music publishers and songwriters of New York's famous Tin Pan Alley. Here to tell us more about love, language, and that Aegean archipelago that we perhaps don't know as much about as we think we do, all hail our comma queen, and please welcome Mary Norris and Ben Yagoda back to the Free Library.
Well, thank you very much, and Mary, welcome to Philadelphia.
Thank you.
You
Nice
wrote a email to me where you broke down the etymology of the city's name.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that here.
Well, let's please, let's do it.
Philos, beloved, and Adelphos, brother, put together by William Penn into brotherly love. Nice. And it's really nice to be here in a place with Greek roots.
Well, I have to admit a little bit of pride of something I learned from you also recently, that I, in my little minor way, had something to do with your career as a writer. Tell me about that.
You had to do with my career as a published writer, for sure. I had always thought of myself as a writer and was just working on the copy desk at the New Yorker in order to pay the rent, and had a lot of writing squirreled away unpublished for something like 30 years. I had a few successes here and there, but one day when I was just about to give up, I was trying to publish a memoir of my transgender sibling, and somebody from the New Yorker's website came to me and said that a guy named Ben Yagoda had written something in the New York Times on their blog that made fun of New Yorker commas. He called them nutty commas. And they wanted me to write about it to defend the honor of the New Yorker. And I thought, commas, give me a break. I didn't want to write about commas, but I was the only one I was the appropriate one to write about something like this for the New Yorker site. I should know something about commas after having been there 30 years. I was the possessor of the famous comma shaker, this can like the size of the things they use in pizzerias to sprinkle Parmesan cheese. Somebody had a perforated can, wrapped paper around it, and penciled on commas. That was called the comma shaker. And this was the renegade proofreader, Lou Burke. She disagreed with New Yorker style, but she followed it. She enforced it. But the joke was that just before a piece went to press, we sprinkled the commas on and sent it away. So anyway, I wrote this thing. I saw a way to write it, and it went viral on the web, and it was really after that that they kept asking me to write more about New Yorker style. We drew back the curtain on the copy desk, and I also wrote about pencils, and from that I got a book contract, and that led to Between You and Me. So thank you,
Well,
Ben
you're
Yagoda.
very welcome, and I'm quite proud of that. So thank you for engaging. And I do feel we've gotten over that little bit of trouble. We've bonded. You as the comma queen, and me sometimes known as the comma maven. So we've got our comma thing, and it is kind of interesting how much interest something as seemingly small as a comma can engender. Now, I noticed, again, to refer to your email to me, you went with the comma in the greeting, the hi, comma, Ben, which is a little bit, not controversial, but it's making a statement. I imagine you think about punctuating your email greetings the way I do.
I do, and I get made fun of a little for, I call that the vocative comma.
The vocative comma.
Yes,
Let me write
and
that down.
it's harder for me to leave it out than it is for me to put it in.
Well, I mean, we're getting our inner nerd out here, so I have to confess, I can't choose either one, so I go with the hey.
And
Hey,
the
no
name?
comma. No, hey name, no comma.
Hey, name.
Sometimes I kick it old school and go to the dear name, comma.
Yes, well, I could do that, but once I have gone with hi, comma, name, then I have to move on to the dash.
The dash, right. Wow, I don't know if we want to go there.
Have we nerded out enough for you already?
I do have to say I have one more comma question, then we'll move on. In your wonderful book, Greek to Me, and Greek is, in fact, Greek to me, so I believe everything you tell me. But I think you say that in Greek, the word and serves as a comma. That blew my mind. Is that so?
There are these things in ancient Greek. They had no punctuation in ancient Greek. Everything was written at first in capital letters. There were not even spaces between the words, and there were no periods at the end of sentences. So, that you really had to decode it. You probably really had to know what it said already before you read it. But they had cues written right into the language or embodied in the language. The word K-A-I, kappa, alpha, iota, is ancient Greek for and or even or also, and it's still modern Greek for and they used to just put that in a list of things, the K between all the in a series. In other words, they had no trouble with the serial comma. They just put this K in before every item in the series, and it was very light. It was really even just as light as a comma to use that K.
Right.
K.
I love that. Okay. Well, this book, as I said, is really a wonderful book. It's a combination of travelogue, meditation on all things Greek, and really a very touching personal memoir as well. And the way you combine those things is great. So, and you touched on this a little bit before, but this and your previous book, Between You and Me, not Between You and I, very important, show you to be such a good and a natural writer. And I'm wondering, all those years at the copy desk, how did you feel about the talent that you had and the ability as a writer you had? You mentioned that there were things you wrote that didn't see the light of print. I mean, how did you view yourself as an editor who wants to be a writer, or what? How did you deal with your writing life in those years?
Well, I wrote on the side. I wrote a lot, and I did have some problem early on maybe even late on, with envy of writers who emerged out of my own generation of people who came to work on the staff of the New Yorker. It would fall to me to copy edit something that was accepted, say for Talk of the Town, the same week that something of mine was rejected for Talk of the Town.
Right.
And I just had to be especially careful not to do any damage, I mean, my job was just to be a sieve, and, that, of course, I would not ever, what would you call it? There's a word that's escaping me.
The sabotage.
Sabotage.
Yes,
That's
thank
the
you.
word. I would never sabotage anything.
No.
And in the meantime, I got to read so many wonderful writers. Was a privilege to read, say, John Updike, to copy edit John Updike. There was practically nothing to do. Right. So, and it was great to read. And the same with John McPhee and Pauline Kael, these great writers. And I learned a lot just from reading those writers. I learned a lot about writing myself, about how to shape a sentence in a beautiful way. So that certainly was not time wasted. I learned a lot about writing from being a copy editor.
But did you always know that your destiny eventually would lie in writing your own stuff?
I wanted to be a writer all that while. And as I said, it was just before you came along, Ben. I was really discouraged. I'd just gotten another rejection, and I was starting to wonder if it was ever going to happen. And so my advice to people who want to be writers is never give up.
Right.
Just never give up. Stick with it.
No, it's a great story. So this book, Greek to Me, two-word question, why Greece?
Well, I decided I wanted to travel in Greece. And I was inspired to travel in Greece by the movie Time Bandits, Terry Gilliam's movie starring people from Monty Python. And the cameo in that, how the plot of Time Bandits is that these little people time travel to the past to plunder treasure. And in one scene, they go to ancient Greece, and there's this cameo with Sean Connery as Agamemnon, dueling with the Minotaur. And the scenery behind him was just very pure and elemental, just this earth, stony soil, and really kind of a sharp horizon and the blue sky, and I just thought it was so beautiful. And my response to art is always naive. It was just, I want to go there. I see a Van Gogh and I don't think, oh, what beautiful brushstrokes. I think I'd like to go there. So I wanted to go there. Yeah. I was working at the time for a man named Ed Stringham at the New Yorker, who had been to Greece. So I went into work and said, I think I want to go to Greece. I want to go to Greece. And he got very excited, showed me the map of Europe on the wall, where he'd taken his first trip to Greece, a cruise among the islands, and then he drew out a book from the bookcase that was Modern Greek for Beginners, and started reading it. And even though I had decided to go to Greece, it had not yet occurred to me I could study Greek and speak Greek. So that was when it began.
Yeah. And you've traveled many times, as you describe, and continued your education in the language, modern and ancient Greek?
Yes. What happened, I studied for a year before I went to Greece, and I got good enough to buy a ticket for a ferry, get a hotel room. You can always eat stuff in restaurants, ouzo, feta, salata. These are not terribly difficult words. But while I was there on one ferry way in the eastern Aegean, I think it was between Chios and the Turkish coast, I was nursing an ouzo, looking at the sea. It was the most beautiful deep shade of blue. And I thought I understood at that point the meaning of the epithet wine-dark sea, that it's not about the color of the sea, but about the depths that you find in, say, a glass of wine. There's something mesmerizing about that sea. And I decided that when I got home, I would study ancient Greek to read what the people who had sailed on that sea had read and written. So I switched to ancient Greek when I got home. And then for the next 10 years or so, I went back and forth, cramming modern Greek before I went on a trip, and studying ancient Greek when I got home. The result is that I have them completely muddled. So I'm not trustworthy at all.
Right. And you even acted in Greek dramas, I read in the book.
I had never studied a dead language. My father refused to let me study Latin when I was a girl, and who knows why. He just thought it would ruin my life, that I would, so that I would become a nun, and he just refused, and I construed it that it would please my father if I didn't study Latin, so I let it go year after year. But when I started to study ancient Greek, I missed those little games you play when you study a living language, you know, like skits in French or eating the local food in Italy. And I saw a poster on campus for Euripides, Euripides Electra in ancient Greek. They were having auditions. And, well, this would be as close as I'm going to get to conversational ancient Greek. So I tried out for that, and seeing as how they were desperate, I got a part in the chorus. And then the dream of every actress came through. I was plucked out of the chorus and given the lead in The Trojan Women. So the next year I played Hecuba, and that was... Actually, it was really difficult. Mainly it was a feat of memory. Mm-hmm. But it also was, you know, I don't know how the people in the audience felt, but that tragedy was completely purifying. You know, by the time that those performances were over, every ounce of bad stuff in me had come out.
Wow.
And I was purified by that experience, yeah.
Among many things I learned from your book, one of them was the word Philhellene. Am I saying that right?
Philhellene?
Philhellene, a lover of things Greek, which you are. And I was thinking that there's a limited number of countries that attract fans. So there's the Anglophiles, the Francophiles, who today are having a sad day, the Italophiles, like my wife, and the Philhellenes. There's no sort of Germanophiles or Norway-philes. And why do you think it is just those limited number of countries that attract the big fan base, as they say?
Well, offhand, I'd say it's the weather and the wine. I know. I think of the Greeks as the Irish of the South, or the Irish as the Greeks of the North. Mm-hmm. You know, people do go and travel in Germany, but I think to be too pro-German is a little dangerous.
There's that, yeah.
France, of course, has a lot of beauty besides the climate, all of those manicured, beautiful country views, and the beauty of Paris, and the food, of course.
Right. I guess all those places, except maybe England, have the food, yeah.
There are a lot of Anglophiles, but that's a literary
thing. The literary
isn't it?
thing,
Yeah.
exactly. Visiting Wordsworth's home and that. Well, can you tell me what you think the qualities that the Philhellenes have? People like yourself, you've met others, I'm sure. Maybe your colleague at the New Yorker, Ed. What are the qualities that the Philhellenes have in common?
I wonder if they tap into something that. You know, we all have Greek in common, or many of us. It goes way, way, way back. There's a lot of words from Greek that have come straight into English, and a lot of roots that we've made new words out of. A lot of it came through Latin. But there's something, I think, the mythology, all of those stories, the epics of Homer were the ancient equivalent of the Bible. All of the stories are attempts to teach you how to behave, and humans have not changed, and that's one of the wonderful things that you find when you read the ancients. They're classics for a reason. They're good. They're really good. And you can be reading along in Herodotus in translation and get to neither rain, nor fog, nor snow, nor dark of night will stop these couriers from their appointed rounds. And it refers to the Persian messenger system. Wow. And it never was the motto of the United States Postal Service.
No.
The architect put it on the building. And they never, they don't deliver in the snow. They're not crazy.
It's true, yeah. We chose a couple of passages for you to read, so maybe we can have you do that before we open it up to questions. You had mentioned the Noah Webster section on page 38. Do you want to?
Yes, there are a few places where this book overlaps, Greek to me overlaps with Between You and Me, and one of them is in the area of alphabet reform and spelling reform, and that leads us to Noah Webster, who consulted with Benjamin Franklin, whose wonderful ideas we're receiving the bounty of right now here in this room. So this is a passage about the letter Z. Sometimes when I was studying Greek on New Yorker time, I'd mix up my alphabets and my dictionaries and open Webster's when I meant to consult Liddell and Scott, the Greek-English lexicon. I'd flip to the end and be surprised to see the letter Z instead of omega. What is that doing here, I'd wonder, before remembering that I was not in Athens, ancient or modern, but in Midtown Manhattan working in American English. I don't mean to demean the letter Z. What would we do without it? The bees would not buzz, the zoo would close forever, the zigzag would lose its zing. The English alphabet seems to run out at the end in a way that the Greek alphabet does not. The letter Z has the feel of an afterthought, which is exactly what it was when the Romans, who had plucked it out of the Greek alphabet in the first place, restored it by pinning it back on at the end like a tail on the alphabetum. In the Greek alphabet, zeta comes sixth between epsilon and eta. Its name follows the pattern of beta, and it kicks off the pleasing sequence zeta, eta, beta. Both alphabets get a little shaky toward the end. The Greek alphabet opens up after Greek Y, upsilon, and tucks in three consonants that the Phoenician aleph-bet lacked and the Greeks could not do without: phi, chi, and psi. Z is still called Z in British English, probably a holdover from the Greek zeta. It is thanks to Noah Webster that Americans call it Z instead of Z. Webster knew a thing or two about alphabets. He studied dozens of languages before compiling the Great American Dictionary. He also knew about pedagogy, how to teach children, having started out as a school teacher. His first dictionary was conceived as a spelling aid for grammar schools. Webster would not have attempted to change the order of the alphabet. That would be madness. But he did suggest some improvements. Rhyme makes things easier to memorize, zeta, eta, theta, and Webster thought it might better serve the cause of literacy to change the names of certain letters in the English alphabet. H would more logically be called he, following the pattern of B, C, D, E, and representing its consonant sound. And W is completely wrong. I remember looking at it in kindergarten and thinking, but that's a double V. Webster wanted to simplify W by calling it we. For similar reasons, Webster thought that Y might better be called yai. What a nut. None of these innovations caught on, but by the time Webster got to the end of the alphabet, he seems to have worn down the opposition. He succeeded in getting Americans to refer to the ultimate character as Z instead of Z. So let's hear it for Noah Webster. And Benjamin Franklin.
And then the other one that I like a lot is the memoir, in the memoir section of the book, your account of your experiences on a boat headed for Cyprus. And that's on 153.
All right, this is going to be slightly redacted.
To get the real story, you're going to have to buy this. Popular prices.
The Sol Frine had come from Venice and was bound for Haifa. I boarded in Rhodes with a deck class ticket after getting off a ferry from Crete. A backpacking elite, beautiful people with deep tans and tiny orange bathing suits, had staked out the sun deck. They had pitched tents and strung up clotheslines and were tossing a frisbee for their dogs. It was as if the Sol Frine were their personal chartered vessel. My own style of travel combined the spirit of backpacking with the burden of conventional luggage. I traveled light, but I had no sleeping bag or bottled water. Instead, I had a striped cotton blanket I'd bought in Crete and a flask of whiskey. I found a spot on a slatted bench outside the lounge under an exhaust pipe. I needed to sleep, having stayed up all night on the ferry from Crete to Rhodes, flirting with sailors. The captain had invited me onto the bridge with its vast array of gauges and gizmos and its unrivaled view of our path through the sea. The chief petty officer, a curly-haired young guy, tried to impress me with his worldliness. "I have been 46 days in Flushing," he said, referring to Flushing, Queens. Once again, I had to explain why I was traveling alone, but I put the accent on the wrong syllable. I was trying to say, I better not even do it here in case there are any Greeks. "Don't say that," the young officer told me. I had said something unspeakably vulgar. It did not mean I was traveling alone. It meant I was a traveling body part. A traveling unmentionable. Traveling naughty bit? How's that?
Naughty bit.
He showed me his cabin and was playing with the buttons on my sweater when he was summoned to the bridge by the public address system. Returning to my seat, I fell in with an able-bodied seaman who took me down to the card deck where we sat in a passenger's sob and listened to Greek music on the radio. He also showed me his cabin, which was way, way below and had pinups on the walls and dirty magazines. He was in charge of the anchor, so at every port he had to go up on deck and lower away. In the morning, I wanted to be on deck again, and that's when I discovered he had locked me in for safekeeping. I tried not to panic. Surely he would be back soon. Finally, I managed to jiggle the hook out of the eye from inside and escape, climbing the ladder like stairs and popping out of the hatch to the amazement of the captain at his post on the bridge. Is that okay? Good.
Would you ever feel it appropriate to have a comma before the word and if so, in what circumstance?
Whoa, they don't waste any time getting to the nitty-gritty.
Now, in Greek, I was going to wrench this away from commas if I possibly could. I am in favor of the serial comma. Is that what you're getting at? The red, white, and blue. Yes, I would put the comma before and in red, white, and blue. Ben? I knew that.
That's what I like, a good controversy over this serial comma. No, I'm with you. I've worked as a copy editor as well, and one of the tenets of the trade is consistency. But
Right.
as a writer, I throw consistency out the window. And if I'm writing the flag as red, white, and blue, no, I don't put a comma in there. But when I write that Mary Norris is written a travelogue, comma, a book on language, comma, and a love letter to things Greek, yeah, I'll put a comma there. So I don't go with consistency in my writing endeavors.
The thing about the serial comma, and I think we both believe this, is that it's not a moral choice. A newspaper decides they're not going to use the serial comma. That doesn't mean you burn the place down. It's just a decision. It was originally to save money. It was an economic choice. Webster's Third took out the serial comma and saved something like 36 pages. Really? Yeah, So it was an economic choice. It didn't even have a name. There was no conception of such a thing as a serial comma until they started taking it out. And then they named it.
Interesting. The man said, "Is that not the Oxford comma?"
Where did you go to school, sir? Well, it's also called the Oxford comma because it's the style of Oxford University Press, but it's also the style of Harvard. It's the style of, it could,
The New Yorker.
The style of the New Yorker. Why don't we call it the New Yorker?
Wall Street
comma?
Journal, but not the New York Times.
Right.
So
But it is called the Oxford comma, I think for reasons of pure snobbery.
Just wondering, you mentioned John Updike and John McPhee, were they or any others rather reluctant to play ball with all the New Yorkers' style?
Absolutely not. The general rule is the better the writer, the more amenable they are to being copy edited, to feedback. John McPhee was an incredible gentleman about it. He wanted to talk about every change and was happy to talk about every change. And John McPhee they want to know, these are people who know that the copy editors are there to make them look good. And the only writers I used to get some flack from were ones who were defensive and not the best writers, frankly.
So I have a follow-up. How do you feel about singular they? Which you... it's a friendly question. I'm curious. What he's asking, of course, is in a phrase like, everybody took their chair, that Or the better the writer, the more they are amenable.
Did I say that?
Yes,
Did I
you
just
did,
say that?
yeah.
The better the writer, the more he or she.
Yeah, right, you can't say that.
Yeah, no, in conversation, we use they all the time when we start out with a singular noun, and then when we refer back, or pronoun, and we refer back to it with another pronoun, we switch to they and their. So in prose at the New Yorker, I was very big on making the number coincide, making the numbers concordant. And instead of everyone took his or her seat, we changed it to something like everyone sat down. And
That's Solomonic.
It was not always easy to find something that sounded natural.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, yes, you admit it and let the writer use the there. There's the other there, they, which now is used to refer to people who don't identify in binary gender roles. And I support that. It's a little hard to get used to,
Right,
but you can, and it
Yeah.
takes a plural verb.
right.
Do you have bad dreams about becoming obsolete as a result of technology?
This is where we creep off stage. Well, humans cannot be replaced. Spell check doesn't recognize homonyms, words like gate, G-A-T-E, and gate, G-A-I-T, words that sound the same, that people often misspell. I've done it myself. For some reason, I've written rye. He had a wry sense of humor, R-Y-E. And it had pumpernickel seeds, too,
Good sandwich jokes, right? Yeah.
And though there are also grammar programs, and I recently saw somebody, there's one called Grammarly, and they put 50 Shades of Grey through Grammarly and took out all the redundancy, which totally ruined the pornography. So, the human touch, I think there'll always be a place for it. And for instance, the New York Times eliminated its copy desk. It now relies on the editors and the writers between them to do the right thing, and they miss a lot, so they carry a lot more corrections, basically. It's more fun to read, actually, for the general reader. Oh, look at that whopper.
Spot the errors, yeah.
You talked about, being envious of writers. Can you talk a little bit about the satisfactions, if any, of your 30 years of copy editing at the New Yorker?
Well, sure. It wasn't all frustration. I got to know a lot of writers. I have developed relationships with writers. I'm a friend of John McPhee's. I love that, we got to be friends. Yeah, it is cool. And as I say, I learned a lot from them. And I think it was good for my character to constantly have to copy editing, the ideal copy editor has high intelligence and low ego. It's not your piece. You can't get so involved with it that you think it's yours and have fights, and you'd get fired pretty soon, I think, if you did that. So I learned if I thought something was right and the writer disagreed, I'd bring it up 3 times and then I'd let it go. So I think it taught me also from watching others who did the same job before me, from the mentors I had at the New Yorker. There were 2 women, both fearsome. One, Eleanor Gould, who was this genius. Nobody really understood what she did, but they followed it. Anyway, and I learned a lot from her. I changed a lot of things and didn't know why I was doing it, which isn't so good. And also, she had a little bit of a tin ear. For a pedestrian writer, she could improve a pedestrian writer, but a really good writer, she was a dead hand on. She, like Grammarly on 50 Shades of Grey. And the other one was Lou Burke, who was a meanie. She actually threw a dictionary at somebody's head once. And yet she was just an excellent proofreader and never made a writer made a writer say something that writer wouldn't say. Mm-hmm. She was always very true to the voice. So what I always tried to do was, if I had a Lou Burke day and felt like throwing dictionaries, I'd sit down and stay at my desk and minimize contact with humans. And I could never aspire to be like Eleanor Gould. I didn't have that quality of intellect. But I had one thing Eleanor did not. I was a bit nicer to people, I answered questions without making them feel small. Eleanor always made me feel small. Whereas Lou, if you asked an ignorant question, she was glad, because once you got an answer, you weren't ignorant anymore. So, it was character forming.
Eleanor Gould was such an institution at the New Yorker. When I was doing the research for my book, I learned that there was various sets of proofs. There was the fact-checking proof, the copy editing proof, and there was the Gould proof that was a separate entity. And she was also such a legend that even though she got married and took the name of her husband, Mr. Packard, she was still known as Miss Gould, because she was such. And I got a chance to interview her, but at that time she was deaf.
Yeah.
And so I had a yellow pad and I wrote my questions and she wrote the answers, and I still have that somewhere.
But she could speak. Didn't she say her answers?
Now I'm not remembering. She may have said her answers. I think I wrote the questions and she said the answers.
Like
yes.
Beethoven. But another wonderful thing about Gould is that she became a verb. We called that galley reading of an article long after Eleanor left. We called that Goulding. We said, has the piece been Goulded? And it was the galley read that a few of us undertook after Eleanor. Poor Eleanor had a stroke in the office and was carried out and didn't come back.
I read recently that it's now permissible to end a sentence with a preposition. No. I know. Is that possible?
I'd like to take this. It has always been acceptable and permissible and perfectly right to end a sentence with a preposition. I believe it was John Dryden in the 18th century who was so enamored of Latin that he invented that rule for English, because it's the way it's done in Latin. It's never been a rule of English grammar. It's just a superstition that was very popular for a number of years. And you could throw your brickbats at me. I can duck.
There are people who say that, and it is true, that sometimes a preposition can be a weak way to end a sentence.
Right.
It can taper off. I think it's actually an adverb in that case, isn't it?
It might be a weak thing to end a sentence with. But it's not
sometimes
a rule.
it's just the natural way
Yeah.
to speak.
Do you ever feel compelled to correct people's grammar, or for example, a newscaster keeps saying between you and I or other errors? Do you?
I have long ago realized that I could either correct people or I could have friends. I don't correct people.
Which did you choose? I think I once,
Wait a minute, where are my friends? Let's see a show of hands. There they are.
I made a mental list of the people who it's okay to correct. That would be your children up to a certain age, but not beyond. My students when I taught, and if I had employees who were writing something and I was responsible for it, that would be pretty much it.
Professionally, right.
Exactly,
mhm.
yeah.
But I actually, I have experience trying to correct people. Somebody, a good friend who said, oh, well, this professor sent flowers to Susan and I, and it's a little bit touching because she always puts her sister first and a little bit formal sounding the I. But, Susan and me, she said, and she's a writer, she said, dialogue. You can get away with anything in dialogue,
But I love it when people correct other people and they're wrong. Like I was with a family whose name shall not be mentioned, and the daughter in her 20s said, I feel bad about that. And the mother said, badly. I said, no, bad. I think she still doesn't believe me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was just going to say that ending a sentence with a preposition is particularly okay if it's part of the verb as a phrasal.
Right.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Well played.
So therefore, it's not really a preposition at that time.
It is not quite the same, you're right, the phrasal verb.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about your travels to Greece, and you've been doing it for a number of years. So have you noticed, since 2008, they've been in a lot of trouble. And in your book, you talked about how you thought the language was dwindling, the Greek language, not the ancient, but the common. And I was wondering if you thought that if you've noticed a change over the years in Greeks feeling, they're so associated with being very proud people of their, of their legacy, their heritage. Have you noticed a change since in the last 10 years in your travels?
Well, I started traveling in Greece in the early 80s. And at that time, a lot changed. They got much better coffee now. You used to have a choice between Greek coffee and Nescafe, and now they know how to make filtered coffee, and you get that. What I noticed in the streets of Athens is the last few times I've been there, since about 2004, since the Olympics, I think, the signs, there are a lot more signs in English in Athens. So English is not going to take over Greek or smother it. Greek will remain. And, but it's harder and harder, I think, to learn modern Greek. I found it, you can find a teacher, you can pay somebody to work with you, but when I was traveling in Greece, so many people spoke English better than I did Greek that, it was silly. And I would really have to ask somebody, please speak Greek with me. I'll pay you to speak Greek with me.
Hi, I think I might be the only millennial here, so I apologize for this question. I would love to hear about the evolution of your brand as the Comma Queen. So when you became that person with that name and how that became 2 books, and what is the evolution?
Well, it's a marketing ploy. When I wrote the first book, we couldn't decide what to call it. And somebody at my agency came up with Between You and Me, which has the double meaning. And I had this idea, well, that'll teach people how to say that without even having to read the book. That didn't work out. And then Confessions of a Comma Queen, that was there. I would have preferred to be called a prose goddess, actually. But they went with Comma Queen, and it took me, this was from my literary agent, and the publisher, editor liked it, and it just went all the way through to the front of the book. And it took me a while to realize that it's a pun on drama queen. I don't know why it took me so long to figure that out.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, nice.
And then some people think that the Greek book is about Greek commas. Comma is from the Greek. It's spelled with a K, comma, in Greek, but there's maybe 3 sentences about commas in the book. Otherwise, they put that on there, Adventures of the Comma Queen, so that all of you who liked the first book would buy the second book. So please make this marketing wisdom come true.
Well, do you have a plan for a third book?
Oh, writers never tell. I have an idea that I would like to write. A lot of my books have come out of my obsessions, obsessions with language, both in English and Greek. I had a long time ago an obsession with cows. So I was thinking of writing something about all the different things that now call themselves milk, almond milk. And I'm one of those people who think almonds don't give milk. But I was in the grocery store experimenting with hazelnut milk and pistachio milk and hemp milk. And a neighbor of mine came along and said, "Comma Queen, milking it." So I might have a book about cows.
I would read that.
Well, I was going to ask about I'' instead of my, which I'm sure you hate the I's.
Eyes.
But you just mentioned
eyes
that you
have
had an editor of your book. Now, how much did they edit of you?
Oh, you have no idea. The fact is that publishing is a collaborating enterprise. And I saw as a copy editor what William Shawn did to writers, how he helped save them from embarrassing themselves all the time. And and I had been wanting to write for so long that when I finally got edited, I was delighted to be edited. And I have a genius editor. His name is Matt Weiland at Norton. And our method is that I write heaps of things. Then he tells me he'll pick one sentence out and say, "This is pretty good. Work with this."
Tough love.
And so it's hard.
Yeah.
And he cuts a lot. But the first time I saw the results of his editing, it was the chapter on gender in Between You and Me. And he had just shaved whole paragraphs out. It made me think of that metaphor of the iceberg, that I thought it was original with me, but it turns out it's Hemingway. That for the part of the book that shows is just the teeniest peak, and there's a mass underneath that of research and things that you couldn't use, things that fell away. But what pleased me after being edited by Matt Weiland was that what was left was crystal clear and it sounded like me.
Wow.
So I love being edited. Copy edited, not so much.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Mary.
Oh, thank you, Ben.